everyone to the Tulsa World Opinion video podcast. I'm Ginnie Graham, the editorial's editor, and I'm being joined today by Chloe Kirk, who very nicely wrote an op-ed that will appear this week and weekend about the International Holocaust Remembrance Day. And that is on Friday. And I will just, and Chloe, backing up a little bit, she is the Director of Holocaust Education and Community Relations. Is that correct?
That's correct.
At the Tulsa Jewish Federation. And so we'll just start with, the basics, explain a little bit of the origins of this day and generally what typically happens as far as remembrances on this day.
Sure. So the day, January 27th, was selected by the United Nations General Assembly back in 2005 to become the International Holocaust Remembrance Day. That day was selected because that was the anniversary of the liberation of the Auschwitz-Birkenau death camp. And so all countries in the UN, at least, obviously, if that extends, that's even better. But every country that is a member of the UN is encouraged to recognize this day and observe it. And the hope there is that we will remember the lives that were lost, but also commit to educating to try to prevent these instances of genocide from occurring again in the future. So typically what this looks like each year is commemorations, services. Holocaust survivors will oftentimes speak or give a presentation. And then it's also a time to really reflect on those education efforts and what that looks like.
It seems like now it's getting further and further away from World War II and the Holocaust. Is it harder to find survivors? I mean, in Tulsa, I think, don't we only have about 5 survivors left or something like that? I mean, it seems like that would make this even more important.
Yes, exactly. So you're right. Obviously, as time goes on, these people will not be with us forever. We are very fortunate in Tulsa that we do have some amazing survivors that still put in so much effort to share their testimonies with us. Eva Unterman is a very famous player in that realm. We have others in our community. We have Mika Epps and Marcel Binstock. And we also have second generation survivors, children of Holocaust survivors that are here in our community. So you're right, as time progresses, this is harder and harder, and we will soon lose this ability to hear from these people. So it is all the more important to listen to them now while we can, because that way we can be kind of like secondary witnesses to keep that message moving forward. But also then to start leaning on those second generations who can tell us about their parents' experiences now that they're no longer with us and carry that message forward that way as well.
I think sometimes those conversations are interesting because as a second generation, they're able to see the trauma. And now as older adults, they can really put in context, maybe things growing up. And I find that so interesting. The other thing I would ask, you are relatively new to the Tulsa Federation and as Director of Holocaust Education. Can you give us a little bit about your background and where you come from?
Yes, so I am a new staff member to the Jewish Federation of Tulsa. I arrived here earlier this month, January of 2023. And my background in Holocaust education began when I was living in London, England, actually. So I took classes in college, and I was sponsored by an organization named the Holocaust Educational Trust. And they sponsored me to participate in a program wherein I became what they call an ambassador for Holocaust education. And that involved not only classes, but that involved a lot of teaching work, middle schools, high schools, universities, the community at large as well as a trip to Auschwitz-Birkenau in Poland. So I have seen firsthand that was the biggest part of that program was they wanted every participant to physically experience a camp for themselves so that they can be an eyewitness basically to the events as we're able to see them now, to say, yes, I have seen these things, I have heard these stories, and I can attest that this happened. And that was a fantastic experience. And I'm very grateful that I was sponsored to do that, and that I had all of those interactions with students and teachers and the community. I met several survivors of the Holocaust during that time. And that's the background that I come from over in London. So I've lived in the Tulsa area now for 10 years. And so now I'm really excited to pick up that work again here in this community.
Well, welcome to Tulsa, even though you've been here a decade. So, but you said you have a background in Holocaust education, and I recently heard a story from a Holocaust educator who was giving a tour at and I want to say this was be slight like in the fall, giving a tour of the Holocaust exhibit at the museum. And she was telling me that it was a 7th grader group of kids on a field trip. And one of the boys was struck and said, so the Nazis were real. And she's like, of course the Nazis were real. But, and not being judgmental of him, he had equated Nazis with superhero villains, which they were superhero level villains. But in his mind, it all came from pop culture, that this was a manifestation of Hollywood, and that's where he got his education about Nazis. And she was telling me this story to kind of show the importance of the museum and education, which I'm already in on the importance of all of that. But it made me think of where kids do get information and what their reactions are when they see what is at the Tulsa exhibit. In your experience, what do you hear from youth? What are the reactions you're getting from kids that are going through that exhibit right now?
I think similar to what you just said, I think going through the museum really brings that to life. I think for younger generations, time is so, last week feels like forever ago. So to think about something that happened in the 30s and 40s, although that is incredibly recent history, that is just so long ago that it's really hard to kind of comprehend. And society's moved on so much, technology's moved on so much. I think going back in time to that period is harder for youth today. And for them to go through the museum and to see these things, I think it really brings it to life and illustrates that. And I think now, because hatred and atrocities continue to happen, and so to be able to link that together to more modern or more current events, I should say, that is really helping younger people understand as well the severity and the reality of what happened in the past. There is definitely a lot as well in social media now that I think it all sounds very abstract, again, until students see it. A lot in social media lately and on television, talk shows and comedy shows of Nazis and Jewish people and all of these negative things. And I think it can be kind of confusing as well for youth to really understand when these words are thrown around so freely and so often by celebrities that they know. And it can really be challenging. But I think what we're doing and with the museum, that really, like that student said, oh, they were real. Yes, like this shows firsthand in front of your eyes what this looked like.
Right. There's been this recent phenomena of equating things, like equating some political figure you don't like to Hitler or to and it's like, no, it's a real person, and that by equating that, it dilutes what really happened and how we're supposed to learn from history. I would even argue, and I should say my editorial comment, adults need to see this too, because so many of some of the things that are said and done come from adults. Sometimes those adults are pretty naive and ignorant of that history too. So while I know you focus on youth and that's important, I would also just, for anyone hearing, if you're an adult, go see it. I mean, you will learn something and think, because it's beautiful. The exhibit has artwork. I mean, the crystal knot area, it's art, and it's powerful. And it makes you think, last year, and this took a long time, but Oklahoma finally, the lawmakers finally passed a requirement that puts Holocaust curriculum into history. And I know that curriculum is still being worked out.
Yes.
But it was one of the shining good things, shining spots, good things that happened last year. When you think about the curriculum, I'm curious, what do you think is important to include in something like that? How do you make that history relevant today? What do kids need to be learning about this event and about what happened? What makes a good curriculum?
That's a really good question. So I just want to say that I'm not a curriculum writer, so I don't know probably all of the correct words and terms and phrases. But from my experience as someone who has taught this, I think that ways to make it relevant is incredibly important. Times are changing. When I was in school, and I know I'm not that old, but when I was in school, we really didn't have the capability until I was in high school and college to watch movies or to see any visual things. My education was very textbook. I also never had the opportunity to go to a museum. But I think ways to make it relevant can be other subjects to teach in. So my education was all in history class, but what I hear when I work with teachers in this role is they bring it into their art lessons or their English language lessons. And that is fantastic to bring it into these other areas. History is very important. We get that historical context, but to be able to bring it into poetry and essays and art really just completes that education, I feel, and gives people the ability to see from other perspectives. So relevant ways that kids can engage with visual, I think is good for a lot of people. I'm a very visual person, so media that we've got some great documentaries available. The museum, of course, to see things in the flesh there. And then also our art contest, I think is something that I love when teachers ask to submit their students' work for the art contest, because the things that come in are so incredible. I'm blown away every single time I see what these kids are able to produce. It's so, you can see the level of thought and care and compassion that they have in some of these submissions, and the creativity is absolutely amazing, and I really love to see that. And I think that's something too that really helps engage students and makes a great addition to the curriculum, to be able to give them that expression, to really kind of think about what they've learned and to translate that into something. And so our art contest is not something that's mandatory on the education side. That's something that the Federation offers every year for schools to participate in. We get a wonderful number of entries, and then we display the art at our annual Yom HaShoah, which is Hebrew for Holocaust Remembrance Day. At our annual event there, we like to showcase the art, and we have prizes for students and also their teachers who are helping them in this learning process. And that is something that I'm really excited to see continue on into the future. And hopefully with the addition of the Holocaust curriculum and that being mandatory, I'm hoping that we'll get a lot more participation as hopefully more schools take an interest in that.
When does that typically occur? When does the art contest typically happen?
So the art contest, we have a cutoff each year in the springtime. So it's depending on when Yom HaShoah falls, the deadline may move a little bit, but March, April time is when we have the cutoff for submissions, and then judges will judge the art, and then our annual event is close to Yom HaShoah, if not the day of Yom HaShoah, as we can get. So this year that will fall on April 20th, our event, and that will be at Temple Israel in Tulsa.
And I've seen some of that artwork, and it's deep. People, I think, always discount what kids take in. And I remember some of that artwork they were equating it with what they see in bullying, what they see in oppression. Some, are taking it very, I see a kid being bullied on the playground, and that's where they're sort of seeing, that's where the Holocaust started. It was bullying. Some of the kids thought broader and took it more in like wars going on. And it was so interesting to see. And some go back to, they would focus on a person that they connected with who they knew died in the Holocaust.
Yes.
So, and you would see artwork of maybe that person in a collage, and it's fascinating to see how they view it. And and you mentioned earlier that, you're young and growing up and what you didn't have. I'll be upfront. I'm turning 51 this week. And I've said, I had no Holocaust education.
Mm-hmm.
It was not in history books. I never heard the word Holocaust come out of any history teacher of mine in secondary schools. We didn't learn any of that. And so everything I learned had to come from the library books that I would check out. And eventually, Steven Spielberg sort of made that into pop culture with Schindler's List, came out in college, and it was, eye-opening. And also, and I grew up in a rural town, and there's not a Jewish culture there in a lot of areas in Oklahoma. And so when I see what the Holocaust exhibit provides is a place where people can get answers and information. And I find it to be vital for Oklahoma, because so many Oklahomans don't know a Jewish person, certainly not Jewish culture or the history. And to understand our world, we have to understand that. And so I really appreciate what you guys do at the museum. And I'm glad that you were able to write an op-ed sort of writing about this event, which is big. It's every year. And are there any things at the museum, any activities the Federation has that you just want to mention? We talked about the art contest coming up. Any other things that you just want to mention about what's happening there?
So we have lots of events coming up this year, but the next one that we're having will be on February 12th. We have a new exhibit coming to the museum, and that is called Stories of Survival. It's an exhibition that will showcase personal artifacts brought to America by survivors of the Holocaust and also other acts of genocide. I'm very excited for this one to see what that will entail. And we will actually be having a reception February 12th, the day that this exhibit will start, at 2 p.m. And that will be here at the museum. So we'll have that reception, kick it off, and then that exhibit will be there until August. So there will be some time to take a look at that. And there will also be, so that one's very Holocaust specific. We have another exhibition coming as well called Humans of Israel. And that is a photojournalist storytelling of the diversity behind the people that live in Israel. So I'm excited for that one in a different way, because I think Israel is so politically charged to talk about oftentimes, that I think people forget that what the government does is not always a reflection of what people do, think, feel, how they are. And there's a lot of misinformation out there. And I think this exhibit that will show real Israelis and what that looks like is going to be very informative and educational for people as well.
Those both sound fascinating. I mean, just in different ways. So making all of this very relevant. So, again, thank you for coming on here and talking to me a little bit. Everyone, read her op-ed. It's going to be online Thursday and in print Sunday. But I just want to give you the last word. Any last thoughts?
I really appreciate this opportunity to speak with you today and to write that op-ed. This is something that I'm very passionate about, and I'm very excited that other people are interested in hearing about it and reading about it too. And I'm very excited to see all the things that we have coming up this year and what that holds.
Well, I would encourage everyone to make a trip to the museum and to just being involved in the art project. And it's a wonderful resource for the state of Oklahoma, not just Tulsa. So again, thank you. And I will see everyone next week on this podcast. Thanks.